don't wait for the quote right time, right this, right that to go. Just go. And don't be scared if someone can go with you or not.
Welcome to the Travel Not to Escape podcast. I'm your host, Geleen on the go, solo female traveler and creative entrepreneur. Think of me as your skydive instructor, empowering you to take the leap into solo travel to push past your fears and transform your life. Join me every Tuesday as we explore the world of solo travel with purpose and discover how you can use it for your personal transformation, learn how to make meaningful connections around the world, and reignite your spirit of play. We aren't just talking about traveling to find ourselves anymore. We're all about doing the work to understand who we authentically are, breaking through our limiting beliefs, and taking the leaps to manifest lives we are excited about. Through interviews, solo episodes, meditations, each episode is packed with practical tips, strategies, and inspiring stories from guests who have transformed their lives through solo travel. Whether you're a seasoned traveler or just starting out on your journey, the Travel Not to Escape podcast is here to inspire and empower you to solo travel with purpose. Strap on your helmet. We're about to jump headfirst into the journey of a lifetime. Are you ready? Let's go. Hi, navigators, and welcome to another episode of Travel Not to Escape. And today's a special collaboration episode with the Minimally Millennial podcast. So we have one of the co-hosts here today, Shelby Boughton, as our guest. And she's going to give herself a little introduction and also share what the Minimally Millennial podcast is all about.
Great. Thanks so much. Yeah, my name's Shelby. I'm half a part of our Minimally Millennial podcast team. My co-host is currently wedding planning, so she is not with us today, but today is a very special episode, like you said, about collaborating here with Travel Not to Escape and doing a travel episode. Very, very excited. Minimally Millennial is all about why did nobody tell me this shit? Adult edition, trying to figure this out all together, whether it be learning your finances for the first time or figuring out life and traveling. So this falls right into our wide range category, and we could not be happier to be doing this collab today.
Yay, welcome. And for the Minimally Millennial podcast, I want to give a little bit of a background on the Travel Not to Escape podcast. So this podcast is really all about helping women solo travel, either for the first time or for the seasoned solo travelers, how to get more out of their solo travel experience so that you're not using it as a form of escaping or distraction from your life, and really using it as a way to transform, make more meaningful connections anywhere in the world that you go, and really reignite that spirit of play in your life. And so a lot of alignment with what your podcast covers as well. And I'm excited to dive into our conversation.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fantastic. I love y'all's mission on promoting solo travel. So
yay. So I always start every episode with a question on play, and it helps me get a better understanding of the guest and also just how, what lights you up. So what was your favorite childhood activity?
So listening to your podcast, I heard you ask this, and the first thing that came to my mind is playing outside. I grew up on a farm, lots of woods, just playing outside. And I think about that same feeling I get now anytime I go into like a national park or just be out in nature. But I never think I connected the two until I heard you ask on your podcast. But favorite childhood activity was definitely just running around out in the woods for like hours and hours.
Oh man, that's amazing. Yeah, it's interesting how it shows up in people's adult lives. And if it doesn't show up, then it's like a cue to maybe add that back into their life. So I always find it as a fun way to get to know people.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And what was your favorite childhood activity? So we can dive into that side too.
I know, dive into my childhood.
Yes, love that.
Yes, it's funny because I asked this question and I don't think I've actually answered this myself. So a couple of things, but the first that really comes to mind and one that I've embraced as an adult is blowing bubbles. So I actually remember like we used to have like a balcony, and yeah, like we would just get dish soap and something that had like a circular form, and we would just like put that in front of a fan and just, like, blow bubbles outside of this balcony, and it probably went in traffic. It went everywhere. It was a ton of bubbles, but that just like amused me for so long. I don't know if it was just like I think just the simplicity of it, or I don't know, like making something makeshift and like creating like a bubble machine perhaps. But I think like it maybe shows up in kind of the way that I do try to have fun in the really simple things in life. So just like, you know, literally blowing bubbles today in my life is like something that I always tend to do, or just like really notice, like even if I'm on a walk somewhere new and like, you know, different flowers that are blooming or things that are just like aesthetically pleasing as well. Like I bring that back into my life by just like noticing those little tiny moments, just like the bubbles, because they're so fleeting.
That's so good too. I feel like as adults, you know, obviously, like I said, our podcast is all about, you know, figuring out adulthood. We don't play enough, like, period. I feel like we just don't. And not play as in, you know, people go out and do fun things, but I'm talking about true, free, like, sober play. I think it's awesome that you asked this question because I think it's something that we don't incorporate enough in our life, especially in the standard, like, regular day to day American lifestyle. It just does not get incorporated enough, I don't think.
No, and it's just like giving yourself the permission to like do something that just feels good,
Mhm.
right? And like because you want to do it, right? So there's like so many things that happen throughout the day where like I had another guest on, and she, you know, when she goes on hikes, she just likes to like stand on rocks with one leg and try to balance on them, right? So like even simple moments like that where you're kind of just you're doing it for the enjoyment, and then other people are seeing that, and it enables them to lean into that child side of themselves as well. I think, you know, play is contagious in a good way.
I think it's so freeing too. Just a very grounds you very much to like the moment you're living currently, not future or past. It's kind of nice, like blowing the bubbles, bubbles of right now.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's like that very, very brief, fleeting moment, but it's beautiful. And, you know, speaking of like freedom, you know, we want to talk about travel in this episode, and I want to get an understanding. Like, so we actually met and connected through a travel WhatsApp group, and that's the Under 30 Experiences. It's actually a group travel company, and they plan all these really cool itineraries to countries that like I've used them even as like a avid solo traveler, because sometimes it's just nice to hop on a trip, meet other people, and not have to worry about the logistics. And so that's actually how we met, was through a travel group. And so I want to dive into a little bit into your like background of travel, like what trip did you go on and how did you start traveling?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was lucky enough as a child, my mom traveled a lot internationally for work, and she would take us on some of these trips. So I remember being in like the seventh grade, our first trip, we went to Barcelona because she had business there, and I was like blown away. And so I think I got really lucky with getting to have some of those experiences when I was younger. And then I dove into college and was doing the whole thing and was going into healthcare. So I was very much on a tight path. And I had not given up on travel. Like, it's something I always knew I wanted to do, but I was like, oh, that's for like later me. That's for, you know, how I think a lot of us do is say, oh, well, I'll do that after this, or I'll do that after I get here, after I reach this goal. Then also, or after I get this much money, then I'll start spending it on travel. And over the course of the end of my college career and into my quote real adulthood out in the real world, I unfortunately lost my mom to cancer, and I think it changed my entire mindset of just life in general. Realizing that there are so many things that like I always think about how my parents would talk about, oh well, when both the girls have graduated and left the house, like my sister and I, they're like, we're gonna get a camper and we're gonna travel all around the US. And I think I always think about how they won't ever get to do that together. And so I was like, why do I keep waiting to do all these things,
Yeah.
to live this life that I've been hoping for, just because I haven't reached this milestone or this or whatnot? And so I had signed up for my first trip without like my family in grad school. I was so excited. I was literally a week out from going. We were going to Dominica on a service trip to help rebuild after a hurricane.
Oh.
And literally the week before I left, COVID hit and all of our everything got canceled. And I was like, oh my gosh. So I'd been waiting all this. I was like, I'm ready to take my life into my own hands.
Oh,
And then we
no.
get stuck inside for like months and months and months. And so we came out of COVID, and I was like, I am ready to jump in. I'm ready to see the world. I'm tired of waiting. I don't care if I don't have the money. I'll figure it out. And me and my friend did our first, solo trip, just the two of us, and went to Scotland for the first time. I feel like I had this transformational journey. She can tell you, I have a journal from it that I just wrote everything down. And I was like, this is the feeling I want. This is the feeling I've been chasing forever. I met so many great people, and it was such a different experience. I was like, I feel alive for the first time in like years. That may sound dramatic, but I was like, I feel like this is how I'm supposed to feel when I'm living, doing these things, meeting new people, experiencing the world outside of the bubble that has been my bubble since I grew up in a small town. So getting outside of that bubble. And since then, I've gone with friends to under 30. That's how I've been getting a little bit more outside of my comfort zone. So I'm taking little baby steps. And we went to Morocco this past May. Ooh. Which that trip is phenomenal for anybody under 30. I'm such a big component for them now, and it was the same feeling. I was like, oh my gosh, I feel so alive getting to enjoy this life. And now I feel like I've started to chase that feeling for each trip. And so now I'm trying to just be like, okay, well, how many trips can I fit in a year? And then I'm like, well, how do I do something remote? So maybe I can do this full time. And we connected, and I was like, she's living my dream. That was just a little snippet of my travel journey over the past few years, if I didn't ramble too much.
No, that's amazing. And I think it's really interesting because I think we may have almost connected in Morocco had I not changed my plans this year.
Oh my gosh.
I was actually set to go to Morocco. So that's so funny because I canceled my trip because I was like I was in Buenos Aires at the time, but yeah, that's hilarious.
Wow.
That I would have met you a few months sooner.
The world is so small. That's crazy.
Yeah, and that's the thing that you realize, like as you mentioned, like once you get out of your bubble, you realize like there's just so much more of the world out there, and it's not as big and scary. It's actually like very connected and serendipitous. Once you're once you put yourself in that situation. I think it's really beautiful that your mom had given you that experience early on, and you're now pushing yourself to live in that memory of what she gave you early on, that freedom and being able to see the world, and also continuing on to some of her wishes as well, seeing the world where she is no longer able to. So that's a tough thing to have gone through, but it sounds like you're using that as a way to really live your life now.
Yeah, it definitely has transformed the way that I see the world and the life that we live, and that it is fleeting. Unfortunately, we only get the one time, the one shot. So there's no reason to wait if you can avoid it. And I think also for a long time, I didn't know there were so many other people out there like me who wanted to travel and see the world. Again, I guess it's another side of the travel story, growing up in a small town where almost everybody stayed. I think maybe a handful of people I know left. And even then, most of them didn't leave the same state. And I feel like I always had that feeling I wanted to travel and didn't realize there were so many other people that had those feelings like I did, to the extent that I did, until I was in my first hostel in Scotland and I met these people who were solo traveling or living. And I chatted with this one girl, and she's like, yeah, I've been traveling on my own for the last 7 years. And I was like, and she's like, and I love it. I still love it. This is great. She met her partner. They're getting married. They're like staying in Scotland. I was like, there's other people like me. It was like so touching because I didn't realize my bubble was so small. And now I get to meet great people like you too, who also have those same journeys and dreams. So I'd also love to hear your incredible story too.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of travel and like meeting more people, is that you realize like you're not alone in wanting what you want, and that it's completely normal to want different things, to want what you want, and that just because it's different from where you grew up and the other people around you doesn't mean that there's not other people that also want similar things. So I think that definitely is a lesson that you learn after you put yourself out there.
Start from the beginning.
So solo travel, I mean, it was always one of those things that I also didn't think was accessible to me. So like my family didn't really travel for fun, really. Like I came from the Philippines when I was 4 to the US and lived a pretty chaotic childhood. And so it was more about survival than it was about anything else. And so I didn't really know that I could travel. I just kind of assumed that just wasn't something that we could afford or ever really fit in, because it was more about like kind of getting that American dream and succeeding. But I started traveling actually when I studied abroad in Rome because of a high school teacher that had mentioned studying abroad in Rome, and she just inspired me to do the same. And so that was really my first taste of traveling and feeling that same freedom that you felt, and being able to meet other people that also felt the same way. So I think that that was like a very transformative experience for me. But then I came back to my normal life after that, and it sounds like we have a similar background in working in healthcare as well. And so I came back and was like, no, I have to pursue healthcare. That's kind of what I set out to do. And I was miserable, but I kept going. And it it was basically to the point where started using travel as a form of escaping my life, because I realized, I was like, oh, it's so hard to change this path that I'm already on. This was the path that, I worked so hard to do. This is the path that my parents, my family, and all of my friends, like, this is what I'm known to do. And it's just, I'll just travel for me, So I did my first backpacking trip solo when I turned 25, and I went all around Europe, and I realized that, yeah, I felt the same way that you felt, where you were like able to meet new people, and it just seemed easy, and you just, you were experiencing new things that excited you. And I wanted more of that. But I kept going back to this life that I felt really stuck in. And it took me a number of years after that, and also a lot of therapy, a lot of coaches, a lot of like taking some risks and believing in myself. But after a number of years, I realized I need to actually address my life and the reason it was the way it was, and what it was I wasn't happy about, because I can't just keep buying another plane ticket to go to another city and then continuing to go back and just feel really depressed. So that's when, after kind of quitting a couple of different corporate careers, I finally took the leap at the end of last year to start this business, to start this podcast, and really full force this mission of helping other women who may be going through a similar thing that I was going through a few years ago, where I was traveling to escape my life. Because now that I've been solo traveling for 10 years full time, since I gave up my home base 3 years ago, I've learned so many lessons in terms of like transformation of like who I was to who I am now, how to make friends, and like deep, meaningful connections anywhere in the world, and also like the importance of like feeling that lightness in your life again, and feeling like you're a child, and really leaning into that version of yourself. And so that's how my travel story and my travel transformation kind of came about.
I think I literally have goosebumps. Like, you're preaching to the choir over here. I love that notion. Full disclosure, I think when I first saw your podcast name was Travel Not to Escape, I didn't get it at first. And the more I listened, I was like, that's what I've been doing. Like, that's word for word what I've been doing with travel, is to escape the box that I feel like I've put myself in here sometimes, that is not exactly where I want to be, but I wasn't sure how to get out of it, because I crave stability and adventure, all and spontaneity, all on like parallel paths. So I love your story, and you took the leap, and it sounds like it's been incredible. And I feel like I get it now. I'm like, oh my God, that's what we do. We travel to escape, not just to live life and enjoy it, more to get away. I'm having a brain blast moment.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing, is like we end up on like stuck in this pattern, stuck in this cycle, and like I want to empower women to realize like that same realization that like it's sometimes you feel like there's two different versions of you. There's a version of you that's at home, that comes back home, that everyone knows about, and like that knows that version of you. And then there's the version of you when you travel, and you love that version of you when you travel. You're more outgoing, you're just more open to trying new things, and you just feel more free and excited about life. And it's like, why can't those two people be the same person? Like, why can't you bring aspects of your travel version back home and like make it one whole person so that you're not running away from yourself. Because the thing is, it's like you can continue traveling and using it as a form of escape, but like the longer you do it, the worse you feel when you come back home. So by addressing the root cause, that's really, I feel like, the way that you're able to then feel more at peace with like all aspects of your life, and like bring those, it's like you don't necessarily have to like leave everyone that is at home behind either, right? You bring them on to the next version of you, and like the people that are meant to stay in your life, that are good for you in your life, are going to cheer on your personal growth, and they're going to be there for you, even though your path is going to be different from theirs, right? Not all of us are going down the same path, and that's beautiful and okay on its own. But the ones that are going to be good for you moving forward are the ones that will cheer you on, regardless of where that path leads you, and vice versa. So I think that that's like one of the things that might scare people from making such a big change. You're like, well, what about the people that I know and love? And it's like, if they know and love you, they will be your biggest cheerleaders on whatever makes you personally happy. And so it's like, why not bring them along and like show them that version of you that's all lit up and excited?
I think that is such a good point, because I don't think I realized some of the, I was going to ask, like, when you started this journey, because I even noticed now that I would go from taking, a long weekend off to go travel somewhere in the US, and then I would take my first full week off to go travel like abroad, and then 2 weeks, and so on and so forth, and then a couple times a year. And especially comments from coworkers, sometimes they're like, "Oh, you're leaving again? Like, how do you," very judgy. And I'm like, "Are you just jealous or what?" Because I'm like, I tell, the response is can go very, very back and forth, but it resonates so much when you talk about the side of yourself that you see when you're traveling versus the side of yourself at home. Because the side of me at home is still outgoing, still this, but is very much like, I need a lot of different things, more anxious buildup, definitely more overthinking and worry. And when I'm traveling, no matter what is happening, I'm like, it'll be okay. I'm not worried about it. A lot more laid back. Like, I remember telling my friend we were on a Morocco trip, I was like, I wish this is the first time I've felt like I've gone 10 plus days without having an ounce of anxiety, even when, faced with travel changes or anything, an ounce of anxiety. And I was like, this is the best medicine that I could have asked for. I was like, how do I translate that back to home? But you're right. Every time you come home, that post-travel depression is real, of coming back to your life. And you're like, so what do I do now?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's such an important question too. And like, really, one of the things that I really want to help people with is because there's reasons, like there's specific moments in your travel journey that you could probably identify and bring those aspects back home, right? Like, was it the fact that were meeting new people? What were those conversations that you were having that really excited you? And are you able to meet new people in your own hometown, or maybe even just have those same conversations with the people that you already have in your life? And then, was it because you were trying new things? Are you trying new things in your hometown? Are you as open to eating by yourself, or going on a tour, or keeping that like explorer mindset, and continuing that even in your day-to-day life, right? Because if you break that down, those 2 weeks that you did all of these things, like, of course you're going to be happy because you're doing all these things that light you up, and then you could like, you just like turn off that faucet of like goodness, and then you go back home and you're just like in a drought. And so you like deprive yourself of all those things because you're like, oh, I'm not traveling, so I don't need to do all those things. I'll save that up for the 2 weeks that I get. And it's like, well, why can't you integrate that a little bit more? Because there's a lot of little things that don't necessarily require you to travel, but it is just a change in mindset. And by changing that mindset, as you come back home, like, it's possible even that the people that you work with don't even have to ask the reason why you're traveling. They can already see from the changes that they see within you. They're like, oh, I get why you travel so much, because like, you're so lit up when you talk about it. Even by just changing that, it'll change your like whole demeanor. Once you change your aura, your energy, people respond to that so well as well. So you start to, because a lot of people might also ask these questions, especially in your own life, because you are now that person that shows that it's possible. You're that person that's highlighting parts within them that they wish were also active. They're more curious than anything, I feel like. And they're more like, ooh, like, why are you traveling? Or like, oh, maybe I can too. But they don't know how to communicate that, perhaps. I always think like that's kind of like their perspective. It might be completely different, but like everyone, especially in like a smaller town, or maybe if they don't travel, it's all curiosity and also kind of piquing some of their interests. It's like sharing more of like why it is, and then showing them the effects of it as well. And then you don't even realize you might actually inspire your own coworkers to travel as equally as much as well. And so you just never know, like once you change your mindset, like the trickle down effects that it has in like your whole circle too.
I love that idea of bringing those aspects that you love about traveling back with you, not just, the memories, the adventures, but really trying to bring back that mindset back with you. And you were saying, if you break down those 2 weeks, what really filled up your cup? And I think you're right. It's the conversations of meeting new people that I feel like there's something special about travelers, not just vacationers or, visitors, but like travelers
Mm-hmm.
that have the similar mindset. And I feel like we see the world very similarly on like a very deep but present level. And so the conversations I feel like I've had with these people that I've met have been at such a depth with strangers that I have never experienced before. And just I feel like the way that we see life is so similar. And I think that's what gives me so much joy. Is I'm like, it's so nice to meet people that are so much like me that I don't know anyone else with that same level. I have friends that love to travel, not gonna be wrong, but not that same, let's try everything, let's do everything, let's live a life rather than just go through the motions and see the world to say that we saw it. I think one of the most impactful moments outside of my trip to Scotland and chatting with this girl in this hostel that I've ever had is we were on the Morocco trip, and me and this stranger who I met 5 days ago, we were sitting at the top of a dune in the Sahara Desert watching the sunset. And I was like, this has to be a glitch in the system. This feels not real. And he just looked at me. He was like, this is the kind of life that travelers live, not vacationers. He's like, we are traveling and experiencing the world right now. And I just feel like that has always stuck with me because I still talk to these people that I met, and it just blows my mind because
Mm-hmm.
just bringing that. But I love the idea of trying to bring that experience to your hometown because you're right. I was like, would I just go have dinner by myself and talk to a stranger? Like, probably not in my city. I think I've done it like one time and I didn't speak to anyone. Would I put myself out there as much as I do on these trips? And I'm like, maybe not. Maybe that's what the change is looking forward to, not just escape, but to bring it back. So I love that point. I think those are excellent points you bring there. How do you feel? I have a question for you that I
Yeah.
hear you talk, and you've obviously gone through such a transformation. It's beautiful, but how do you feel your outlook on travel has changed? And I say travel in quotes because obviously you're full-time traveling now. How do you feel like those feelings have changed from when you were chasing that during your corporate life, week to week for a vacation versus now?
Yeah, and I think the change is in kind of the depth in the travel that I do now. So before I was going, taking a photo, escaping my life. I was also meeting a lot of people, but the people that I met weren't as like, we would go, we would have adventures, we would stay connected, but I feel like we didn't get to the depth of like deeper, meaningful friendships. It was always like, oh, and these are like my travel friends. And then like I go back home and these are like my like long-term friends, And I think like the biggest difference, like having the switch to like long-term travel and full-time travel and not having a base is that I've had to really hone in on how to make meaningful connections, like, and make sure that it's long term. So like whereas before it was like travel friends versus long term friends, it's like everyone I meet is now a potential like deep meaningful connection, because there is no separation between those two aspects of my life. And I think that's like the beautiful thing is just I am just the one person now. I don't have to go back and forth between like different versions of myself. And when you play those two different versions of yourself, you never feel at peace. You're kind of like battling yourself. You're like, oh, but I want this, or I should want this. And you start to say all these shoulds between the two. And like neither side is going to win when you're not putting your whole energy into one or the other. And so now I am so grateful because I get to just be the one person, right? I don't have the person that's me at work and me with family and me with friends at home and then me when I travel. Like I can be like my weird, authentic self that's obsessed with travel, and I can be that 100% of the time. And the people that I meet, they know that version of me, and in whatever situation I'm that same person. And so I'm no longer battling my own self. So it's a lot more peaceful. So I'm not wasting a lot of my energy trying to be like, different versions of who I think I should be based on who I'm surrounded by. It's more of like me now connecting and attracting the people into my life that know who I am 100% and accept that. So, that's been a really beautiful change. And I just feel like because of that, it's again, no longer me escaping like my situation or myself. It's just really me now trying to figure out like what type of impact I want to make on the world. How do I want to help other people? Like what is it that I want to spend like my life doing? Because as you mentioned, it's a very fleeting journey that we all have. We don't know when our next day, or our last day is going to be. And so in the short time frame that we have in life, it's like I want to be who I am, and who I am then resonate with other people and change them. So I think that's really like the magical transformation that travel has really given me, is that I now spend my energy like focusing on now other people because I've been able to like get more in touch with myself.
I think that's incredible. And I feel like finding that in yourself is such a, I mean, I applaud to you because I think there's so many people that aren't brave enough to take that leap. And so I deeply applaud you for taking that leap and knowing yourself enough to do that. Do you feel like there's any specific moments in your pre full-time travel journey that made you say, this is what I want, like full time?
Yeah, well, so the first thing that was a wake up call for me was in the pandemic, I was able to work remotely, as a lot of people were. And I used that time to work remotely with friends. So, like, we would all, do our like 9 to 5s together, but like in separate rooms or wherever quarantine house you're in. And I have like a lot of really amazing, inspiring, empowered friends in like amazing corporate roles. And I knew that they were, higher positions, making more money than me. And we were all working together. And then I realized they closed their laptops after 5 p.m. Like they had like a really good, healthy work-life balance. And I was over here still working until midnight, trying to get my deliverables and deadlines in, and being really stressed at that. And so I realized, I think, wait, hold on. Like my perception of success at that time was like, oh, getting a high paid job, having a good title. And I actually was confronted with like other people that I knew and loved. Like before, I thought we were all just working this hard. And I realized, oh no, that was just, I had something that I was doing wrong because I'm working twice as long and not even where I like had compared myself in terms of like level of success in terms of title and money. Right. And so that was like really a realization for me, was like, oh, what am I doing? And they were even concerned for me. They were like, we didn't realize you worked this long. And I was like, I didn't realize I worked this long. Like, hold on. Like, why are you guys not working this long? Is this not normal? Right. And I think that was one of the things that started me off on this journey of like, what am I doing? Like, I no longer feel like this is right for my life. I no longer feel like this is even something that aligns with my purpose. I didn't know what my purpose was back then, but I was just like, oh, something feels off. Right. And as I continued working with like other friends, co-working with other friends, because like when you're in the corporate world, right, and we're working with your coworkers, it's normal to work that long for that particular job. So when I was working in consulting and we were all working until 2 a.m. in the office together, that seemed really normal to me. But then when I was working with friends who I knew made more and had better titles and they were working half as much, it no longer felt normal. So that was like the biggest difference. And I kept working with other friends and they were like also doing the same thing. So then I was like, time to reassess my life, because clearly I've been brainwashed by this company to think that this was like a normal type of work-life balance. So that was definitely one of the things. And I think it kind of goes back to like the perspectives when you're in a bubble, is like, once you get out of that bubble, you can't piece that back together, right? Like it's popped. And then it's kind of just like working your way out of it and realizing, okay, now I need to figure out like what actually is real, because clearly you know, I was living a life that I didn't realize I was living. So that was definitely like one of my first realizations, to kind of like start to unravel this like life that I had like packaged for myself.
What do you think? Well, I guess two loaded questions, of course. One, what do you think was the scariest jump of leaving that? Like that feeling of the one, two, three time to go. What was your scariest moment? And then two, how does it feel to look back on those friends now? And they, how far you've come now. And I'm sure you're still in touch with some of them, but how does it look looking back to those times now?
Yeah. Yeah. So it wasn't a quick process, right? And this is why, like, I'm definitely not saying like, oh, to change your life, it's a very quick process. No, it's a lot of hard work, but you have to, one, first be aware of it, and then two, be willing to do the work to get out of it. Right. And so this was my awareness piece when that bubble burst, and was like, oh, okay, it's not it's not as great as I thought it was. And the second was, okay, now what do I need to do? And my friend, actually, the one who was like, you're working a lot of long hours, she was the one who actually suggested, because I was like, oh, I need to change my job. But at that point, I was 6 years into a healthcare consulting career, and kept saying, oh, I'm going to change my job. I'm going to change my job. And she called me out and said, well, you've been saying that for the last 6 years. Are you really going to? And what can you do differently now than what you've done before? And so because of that, it really forced me to think, oh, okay, maybe, I just said, oh, maybe I'll just like apply to more jobs, right? Like do more of what I thought I was already going to do. And she's like, well, how about you hire a coach? And I was like, oh, I never really thought about that. Like, I don't know what a coach can do for me. And I think I went into it like open-minded, because as she was right. Like I had been searching for jobs for 6 years, and searching for more jobs wasn't going to be the thing that changes my trajectory. So I hired the coach, and what she ended up doing for me was she broadened my perspective. And the reason I hired her was because I wanted a new job. And at the end of the 6 months that we worked together, I actually didn't even have a new job. But what I did have was more clarity on what it is I didn't want in life, and what it was that I wanted moving forward. So I realized that like having just another new job wasn't like the transformation for me. It was actually, she allowed me to trust in myself enough to realize I could get any job I wanted, but I had to actually want it. And because I wasn't wanting any of the jobs that was put forth to me, like none of it was working right. So it kind of like, working with her helped give me permission to try something completely different, and really trust that, hey, you know what? I've carried myself up to this point. Like I should be okay with some ambiguity, because ultimately I know that I'm going to carry myself out of it. And so at the end of that coaching period, I actually ended up quitting without anything lined up. And so that was like my scariest moment, because I went from like a 6 year career to like absolutely nothing, and just not even like, like no offer signed, didn't know what I was going to do next. And, another friend, actually, I'm very fortunate that I have like built a beautiful like support system of friends that like will call me out and also support me through some of these life transitions. But another friend, she and I started traveling together in the US, nomading, and she was the one another person in my life who said, hey, you're also working really long hours. Like you need to change. So I had like multiple people in my life saying like, you should make a change. And she was one who was like, hey, like we're nomading together. If you want me to cover the rents for the next couple of months while you figure it out, like more than happy to. I know you're good for it. Like I just want you to be happy, and like, not have the pressure for the next couple of months. So that was like, I'm super grateful for that as well, because she helped me through that transition. So I had some great friends that kind of helped kind of changed my trajectory and pushed me out that door. And then even now, they're like still my greatest cheerleaders, my greatest supporters, and vice versa for their life changes that I've been able to help them with. And I've actually had this conversation recently with them as well, where they're like, man, like, remember like 5 years ago or 4 years, like when we were kind of going through like the pits together, and you were like crying on the corner of the room because of that deliverable that you didn't make the deadline for. And now you're in Bali building your own business, like it's really beautiful to see it on the other side, but like that didn't come without all of the tears shed, without all of the like weekly coaching sessions and weekly therapy sessions, and just like friends calling me every day just to check in on me to make sure that I wasn't like just crying in the corner of the room again because I was just so anxious, right? So like I think connections is definitely something that is such a big thing, like opening yourself up to the people around you and like allowing them to help you, even though you yourself might be like, oh no, I'm good. Like I'm definitely like the type of person that's like super independent. I'm like, no, I'm good. I don't need any help. But that was a moment in my life where I was like, oh, okay, it's okay to need help, and it's okay to listen and like not know where you're going to go next, and allow others to help guide you.
I think so many people will resonate with your story and not even realize it. I feel like I'm listening to you talk and I was like, that sounds like me. Like, I just like, again, I really applaud you for taking that leap and really taking your life into your own hands. And I love your mission of really trying to help women do this, because I know, at least for me, something that holds me back from solo travel specifically. Like, I think I jokingly mentioned earlier, I try not to do a bucket list. I try to do more of a
Yeah.
decade list.
Yeah.
So I'm coming on to my last 2 years in my 20s, and I have 30 things I want to do before 30. And one of the big ones on there is to do a trip by myself. And I am like terrified. I'm excited and terrified. Like, hearing you kind of inspires me a little bit more to be ready. But how do you, I know you specifically target towards women. So how do you feel like you empower these women? Because a lot of mine is a safety thing.
Yeah.
I'm nervous, to be fully honest. Like, I know you can't tell through our video, but I'm very small. I'm like 5 feet and very tiny. I always make the joke, I'm like, I could fully fit into a suitcase to be kidnapped, like not a problem. So it's very terrifying. But like, all jokes aside, how do you reach over that barrier with women with solo travel, and with yourself, of reaching over that fear factor of being a woman this day and age?
Yeah, yeah. And actually that's what I wanted to ask you, is like, what are your limiting beliefs in terms of solo travel, right? So I think it comes down to like 3 components. So it's figuring out like what exactly your limiting beliefs are and addressing those, and then surrounding yourself with people that make you feel like it's possible, and then doing the actions that will get you closer to that goal. So as we're talking about safety, it's about giving yourself those like small baby steps to build up your confidence. So I'm not saying, go all the way to like insert unknown city here you've never traveled to by yourself and just like drop right in. Like, yes, you can take those big leaps, but if you're the type of person that needs to ease their way in, then by all means, yes, like set yourself up for success. And I think that a good small step would be doing the things that you would do on a solo travel trip, and doing that in a environment that maybe is a little bit more familiar, right? So like maybe it's within your own town, where you start taking yourself out on tours, taking yourself out on some solo dates, and maybe you do a little staycation and simulate a full solo travel experience, but somewhere where maybe it's just like an hour or 2 away from your house, so you still have the safety net and can kind of build your confidence in little ways like that. So I think that that's like a good way to just at least give yourself that trust and confidence in a situation. So like, because you're not going to know, like, you don't want to experience all these like anxiety things coming up in another country, right? Like if you know that that's going to be a hurdle for you, it's like, well, how about you create an environment that's like almost like a simulation, but it actually is real solo travel, but is not like thousands of miles away. So that's like a first tip that I would give to people, is like, in what ways can you bring that over? And then the other thing too is like doing the research and the planning to again set yourself up for success. So there's so many blogs out there that recommend like top 10, top 50, whatever it is, list you want to look at safe solo travel destinations for women. And then once you get that list of cities, see which city resonates with you. And then again, second piece was surrounding yourself with other people that make you feel like it's possible. There's so many Facebook groups, WhatsApp groups, as you and I have connected on, of other solo female travelers from that city. So that's actually one of my major tips in terms of meeting people, is going on. So if you do a search for example, solo female travelers, Bali, there are so many groups for that, like hundreds. And you can just post on there like a little intro of yourself of like, hey, haven't solo traveled before, feeling a little anxious. These are the types of activities that I like to do. And the beauty in these groups is you can actually connect with people ahead of time and set up solo dates or group dates or even like a meetup for when you land. So before you even get to that city, you will already have a group of women that you can connect with and some like one-on-one activities planned that you can do, or some tours that you can do. So like it almost feels like you already have friends before you even land, and other women that have solo traveled and can give you pointers as well. So there's a lot of things that you can do, like small actions, big actions, that will boost your confidence so that by the time you fly to this city, like say it's Bali, so by the time you fly to Bali, you're so prepared and you've already met so many people that by the time you land, you're like, oh, okay, like I don't know why I held myself back for so long when like this is amazing, this is fun, right? So it's like I think you need to break it down into smaller steps so that like it's a little bit more real and tangible in your mind. Because if you're like, oh my God, I'm going to solo travel thousands of miles away, yes, you're going to be terrified if that's like the big like thing that is like weighing on you. But as you start to break things down, like with anything in life, you're like, oh, well, I can do that one small thing. And like that small thing too is fine. And then it all adds up. And then the next thing you know, you've been in Bali for like years and you're fine.
That's such a great tip. I don't think I would have thought to like do the same actions in my own town before, but I like that you bring in very realistic ways to bring travel to you, not necessarily going to the travel if it's a big leap, but bringing some of those travel aspects, whether it be like we talked about earlier on in the episode of bringing what you love about travel back with you and working on changing that aura, or
Mhm.
using it as like a prep in your own city or close to your own city to go out and do these things. I think that's a bunch of great tips. I know that, you know, a lot of my questions for you in general, or my interest really in your story after listening to everything, is taking those leaps. And, you know, you've started to build a business off of this process, but really inspiring people to take the next leap to work to their journey. I think that's incredible.
Yeah. And like the leap can be like, like a leap, I feel like is relative to you. And like what a big leap could be for someone might be a small step for someone else, right? So like it could be a small step for you, but like that might just be like a huge leap depending on where you're starting from. So don't compare yourself to other people who like just booked a one-way ticket and like backpacked on their own for months, and it's like, well, maybe that's like too big of a leap in comparison to where you're starting right now, right? Everyone has their own journey. And so it's like also about like focusing in on like where you're at and what's achievable for you, and not like scaring yourself because you didn't take like this huge grand like leap of like changing your life all at once. Where specifically I know you said you were in Georgia. Where specifically are you in Georgia?
I'm in Atlanta.
Okay, nice. So there's so many things in Atlanta that you can do. It's such a hub, and like there's so many places you can go to as a tourist too.
Yes, it's working on re-becoming a tourist. I've been here for about 4 years now, so it's working on re-becoming a tourist, or even just I'm so lucky to have so many friends here that love to go out and do things. So I think it's also maybe, at least within my own life, of setting maybe some boundaries of like, no, I'm going to try to do this on my own. It's like a goal of mine. Love you guys, but I'm going to do this on my
Mhm.
own. Of taking that leap too, because usually I have friends that are like, "Oh, that's so great. I'll come with you," and I'm like, "Okay, sure." But maybe taking that step to making a little bit more boundaries of setting up and just trying on my own.
Yeah, and I think especially since you're in Atlanta and there's like just so many people from all over the world there. There, you can even test out my recommendation of joining a travel group of like solo female travelers or people that are new to the area, and posting on there or seeing what events that they have there, and just testing it out, of like going to an event on your own and simulating that solo travel experience within your own city. Because at the very worst, you can leave after an hour and you're like, oh, cool, that just wasn't the group for me. But like at the best, you have an amazing time and bring in that like solo traveler energy to you and give yourself a little bit of a boost. And the more that you do it, the more you're like, oh, I don't know why this was so hard to begin with.
Yeah, I love that idea. I did do something similar to that when I first moved here to make friends. And I think after I had met a couple, I stopped doing it. But maybe I think reigniting that kind of energy and bring it back around, relap it around.
Yeah, exactly. Especially since you mentioned you're like doing like outdoorsy things and like being in your body, being outside. And an interesting thing that you could lean into would perhaps be like social sport leagues or those types of like activities on like meetup.com or Facebook groups, or if you can find like WhatsApp groups in the area. Like so many people, like I feel like that's the commonality, especially after COVID, is that people are lonely and people want to connect. And so there's always going to be some type of activity where people want to get together and meet other people. And it seems like a little intimidating at first because you're like there's like these group of strangers and I don't know. But I think if you focus it on activities that light you up, that like you feel excited about because they simulate play for you, then it's a little less intimidating because you already have something to connect over, rather than I'm going to go to this happy hour and try to find the random 10 people that are also part of this group. Then now I have to figure out who they are and approach, and then have to introduce myself or come up with a conversation, right? Like that's so many more steps than, oh yeah, I joined a kickball league and met some new people because we all wanted to play kickball, right? So there's just like a little less shorter barrier to entry by doing some of those activities.
Love that. And what do you think kind of, coming to round off this episode as a whole, are just some bullet points, your tips and tricks for fitting, travel into your life, not just to escape and solo travel? I know we've talked about a lot, but just if you have any typical bullet points you typically give out, or just some general tips and tricks to kind of help round us off.
Yeah. So I think that in terms of solo travel, like I want to emphasize that, like, again, it doesn't have to be a big grand trip. It could just be to another city, as long as you're challenging yourself, because really solo travel is just the vehicle for the transformation, right? And people can have their like life transformation, personal growth in a lot of different ways, but people are craving, like women specifically that I work with, like they're craving solo travel for a reason. And then there's possibly because it hits on some of the values or some of the life vision that they see for themselves, but maybe are a little afraid to take that leap towards. And so it's kind of understanding also like what is it about solo travel that you're drawn to? And like, what type of experience do you want to get out of it? And being more intentional to get that experience. Because the other thing that I think I see a lot happen, and that also scare people or scare women from doing the solo travel, is they see other people's itineraries or types of solo traveling, and they just copy that. They're like, oh, okay, backpack through Europe, I'll do that. Or like sign up for this like Kentucky tour through whatever city, and they'll just hop on. And then they get anxious, or they're like, oh, I didn't really meet the people I wanted to meet, or like, oh, like I didn't really have the experience I wanted to have, but they never actually asked themselves, what experience did you want to have? Like, what were you looking for? And like, what was missing from that? So I think it really, like, if I were to give maybe one tip, it would be like being intentional in regards to like what it is you want, not just like out of the solo travel experience, but like out of life. Like, what do you want your life to look like? And like really diving in deep on that question and like sitting with yourself, because everything else will fall into place once you kind of have your direction. I like always tell people, like, once you have kind of like that general idea of where you want, everything else is just details towards that path. Like, you can make decisions so much faster once you have an idea of like which direction you're going. But it's like first asking yourself that question. That's the hardest part. So yeah, spending some time internally, taking yourself out on some solo dates, doing some journaling, and really focusing in on like what experience, what life do I want to create for myself, and like how is this trip going to contribute to that?
I think great advice. And
Yeah, I want to ask you as well, like what, I guess, like with the experience that you've had so far with the group travel and kind of like where you want to go with the solo travel, like what advice would you give maybe a younger version of you who hasn't even done like the group travel step? That's the first one. And then the second one is like, what's the first step that you are going to be taking to get over that solo travel fear?
I think the younger version of me, I would want to tell her just to do it, like to not be scared, that you know how to take care of yourself, you know how to budget for a trip, you know how to plan these things. Like you have all the tools in your toolbox. It's just time to use them. You know, don't wait for the quote right time, right this, right that to go. Just go. And don't be scared if someone can go with you or not, or joining these groups. I think finding the under 30 group in general has given me a lot of freedom and a lot of confidence in myself, because I don't think even planning a trip with one friend, I would have been confident enough to go to Morocco on my own. Not even that it's necessarily dangerous. I just think I grown up was taught growing up some that the world is something to be feared, not necessarily to be embraced. And so I think I would have told my younger self, it's a big world out there. Like stop waiting for it to come to you. Just go to it and do it. And I think hearing your advice and going through it, I think I want to start making some smaller changes, like something that I love doing is hiking, but I tend to always find myself waiting for someone to go with me. So maybe my first step in doing more solo activities is to start taking myself on, maybe hiking or like a cabin weekend, a night or two away, and kind of start from there and build up, because I would love to do. I don't have a lot of friends in my immediate friend group now that either have the ability or the desire to see a ton of national parks, but I do. So I might be starting to, even thinking this year, of slowly working my way up to doing some national parks maybe by myself this year. That's my
Oh,
next steps, I think.
yes, that's amazing. And I think the other thing too is that just because you're solo traveling doesn't mean you're actually alone. And I find that like I'm barely, I actually have to carve out solo time now, because I feel like if you put yourself out there, so many people are just magnetized to chat with you, especially solo travelers. Solo travelers always like to meet other solo travelers. And like one of the things too that you could do is reach out to like local hiking groups. There's so many through, like if you go to REI has like their own community of like hiking groups that go, and like Facebook groups as well, and like meetup groups. There's just so many ways where like if you want to go solo and push yourself, I think that that's amazing. And then also like if you're going hiking abroad, like I feel like a lot of people also join hiking groups when they travel abroad. So that would be something that you can test as well as you're taking that next step, is like what is it like to look for something similar like a hiking group in my own city, as well as like going solo for sure.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've definitely seen those, but I've never taken the leap to actually get on them. So now may be the time.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I'm excited.
Take my own advice to stop waiting.
Yeah, exactly. What's one question that you would have asked your younger self, like a self-reflection question that you wish you would have answered sooner or at the start of your journey?
I think it kind of goes back. I would have wanted to ask myself, like, why are you waiting? Like, what are you waiting for? What shoe are you waiting to drop to come down? But I think that over the course of, growing up, or, especially after college, when you really start to make those big, in your early 20s, mid 20s, late 20s, those big leaps and bounds in your personality and your growth as a human, I think I look back on my younger, maybe less confident self, and when I ask them, like, why, just why?
Mhm.
Like you have all the tools in your toolbox, you know what you want. Don't be afraid to chase it anymore. So I guess my one question would be like, why wait?
Yeah.
Like, what are you waiting for?
Yeah. Yeah, I think we don't ask ourselves that question sooner than like I feel like yeah, we always wait, and then when we actually make those changes, we're like, man, why did I wait so long? I could have done this so much sooner. Like that's like with any big transformation, right? Like we're always just like, man, I wasted all those years. I was thinking about like a question that I would ask my younger self, and I think the pivotal one for me that I only realized a few years ago was what are your values?
Mm.
And when my best friend had asked question, I was like, what do you like? I don't know, like, how do you answer that question? And I realized there's actually a way to answer this question. So there's like a whole worksheet exercise. You can just Google this online. There's like over 200 words that are all different values. And you can go through this list, see which one resonates. And then you kind of like go through this exercise of narrowing it down to your top 5. And I didn't realize until I did this exercise that everything that you value really is, and it resonates with all the different parts of your life. So in terms of like my career, and we were talking about the career change, when I was working through with my coach, and we realized like my values were like adventure and community and freedom and impact and ambition. And she was like, okay, now let's think about your job now, the one that you're unhappy at. Like, how many of those values are being met in this current position? And I was like, oh, none, like 0. And she's like, well, that's why you're unhappy. And I was like, oh, well, that's a light bulb moment. And then we did the same exercise with my relationship, we did the same exercise with like where I was living, the city I was living in, and with like my friendships and with my family, right? Like and also my health. Like we did this for like every part of my life, kind of doing a values exercise and seeing like in what areas was I happy. Like, so as I mentioned with my connections, I was like, oh yeah, I love my friends. Like, so, like all of my needs are being met, all my values are being met with my connections. And like that, and then I was able to visualize and like really feel like what that felt like to have all my values met in one area of my life. And then compare that to the other areas and realize, oh, okay, like this is the integral piece. Like I didn't realize this sooner. So that would be like the one thing that I would push people to ask themselves sooner, is like go through the exercise of understanding what your values are, and then take a look at all the other areas of your life, like see where they're being met, where they're not being met, and in what ways can you change those sections of your life so that the values are being met, or at least the majority of them are. Because really, like, you're going to be like so lit up if like the majority of the things that you're doing in life touch upon those values. And that's like a quick, or not necessarily quick, but that's like a step forward, at least in terms of changing your direction.
I, somewhere in the back of my brain, remembered that from a therapy session like years ago. And you're saying that, I'm like, that is such a good point, because I think I had the same reaction. My therapist at one point said, like, what are your values? And I was like, I don't know. They're just my values. And she's like, well, what are they? And I'm like, I don't know. Why are you asking me this? All the therapy questions. And you say that, I'm like, man, I want to take that sheet out and do it again, because
Yeah.
it's so hard to pinpoint the words of like, I feel unfulfilled, but I'm not exactly sure why. And I think that's such a great exercise. One that like I said, buried somewhere back here.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's excellent advice. I feel like everybody should do that and understand that it's okay that your values can change as you get older, have new experiences, and start to, mold the life you want to have versus, what you've kind of fell into maybe.
Yeah. And it starts to make you feel more normal for wanting the things that you want, right? Because as you start to realize your values are unique to you, and the people around you have different values, it starts to be okay that you want different things and that you're going to go off into a different path because you are just being true to you. And it gives you permission to feel okay with making those changes as well.
Well, this has been such a fantastic conversation. I know both of our audiences, I think, are going to really enjoy just having, that open conversation about travel and what it can do for you. I think it's more than just a vacation overall. What we talk about, it gives a lifestyle choices that we make and values that we have. So I think this has been a really eye-opening conversation. I know not just for me, but I'm sure a lot of people that are listening. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your travel journey to sit down and have this conversation. This has been so fulfilling and great.
Yeah, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm excited to see where you end up. And yeah, if you have any solo travel questions, you just let me know, because I can definitely help with those.
Excellent. I will. When I'm like start getting stressed, I'll be like, help.
Yes, exactly. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Travel Not to Escape podcast. I hope you found our conversation inspiring and insightful. And if you're ready to take the next step in your journey of self-discovery through intentional travel, I invite you to join our vibrant and supportive community of solo female travelers over on Facebook. Inside our community, you'll find like-minded women from all walks of life sharing their stories, experiences, and tips on how to make travel a transformative part of your life. It's a safe space to ask questions, seek advice, and find inspiration. To become a part of this incredible community, simply search for Travel Not to Escape on Facebook groups, or you can click the link in the episode description. I can't wait to welcome you into our tribe of fearless travelers. Remember, your journey of self-discovery begins with that first step, so don't hesitate, join us today, and let's embark on this adventure together. Until next time, keep exploring, connecting, and playing, and safe travels, navigators.